Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here, well, it's pretty simple. We take a whole stack of information, pull out the key insights, the real nuggets of knowledge, and basically create a shortcut for you so you can be genuinely well-informed. Today, we're diving into two really compelling areas. They've both captured attention recently, sparked some pretty intense debate. First up, we'll unpack a really dramatic legislative standoff down in Texas. Political strategy is front and center there. Then we'll pivot. We're going to shift focus to a fascinating discussion around career, family, and what it might mean for conservative women to sort of have it all in these high-profile roles.
Yeah, what's really intriguing is how these topics, they seem pretty separate, right? But they actually show some deeper currents flowing through our political and social landscape. Try to connect the dots for you. Between the legislative tactics, the shifting cultural stories, and, what it all means for public discussion more broadly.
Exactly. So get ready for maybe some surprising facts, maybe a few aha moments. We'll guide you through the core issues, the different perspectives involved, and, crucially, why this stuff is relevant to you. Let's dive in. Okay, so first up, Texas. The sources we looked at, they really paint a picture of a dramatic situation in the Texas House, a big maneuver by the Democrats.
Right. And this brings up a key question. Why did they do it? Why did Texas Democrats actually flee the state? Well, the main goal really was to deny the Republican-controlled House the quorum it needed.
The quorum, right. That's a minimum number of members needed to do business.
Exactly. 2/3 in Texas. So 100 out of 150 members. Without them, the Republicans couldn't hold votes, couldn't move legislation forward.
Okay, so denying quorum was the tactic. That's really interesting. But what specifically were they trying to block? What was the legislation that was so critical?
The main target, according to the sources, was this proposed congressional redistricting plan. The Republicans were aiming to add 5 new seats that leaned Republican, ahead of the 2026 elections.
5 new seats. And the Democrats' argument was?
They argued it would basically cement GOP control. Even though the state's population has grown a lot, especially in diverse urban and suburban areas, they really framed it strongly, calling it a Trump gerrymander.
Un-American and illegal were terms used too, weren't they?
Yes, exactly. They said it aimed to silence millions of Black and Latino voters. Big claims. They talked about democracy itself being at stake, freedom itself, warning against a, quote, one-party system takeover, and saying they had to fight back.
And this whole walkout tactic, it's not completely unprecedented in Texas, is it? Feels like we've seen this movie before.
That's right. Our sources pointed out this was actually the second time in, modern Texas history that Democrats used this strategy. The last time was back in 2003. And guess what? It was also over redistricting.
Wow. Okay. So history repeating itself there. Now, you laid out the Democratic perspective, this fight for democracy, but the sources also showed the other side, how Republicans and their supporters saw it. How did they frame the walkout?
Very differently, as you'd expect. Generally, they viewed it as, a tantrum. That was a word used.
Yeah.
And weaponization of chaos. They accused the Democrats of abandoning their duty.
Abandoning their jobs, basically.
Yeah. And claiming the whole move was just an attempt to rig the system. Because, in their view, the Democrats knew they were in trouble at the ballot box anyway. We saw a quote from Mary Catherine Ham, a Fox News contributor. She called the Democrats' actions so embarrassing, like a bit of a tantrum. She basically said, just, go and do your jobs.
And there was also this element, critics pointing towards perceived hypocrisy, right? How did that fit into the Republican counter-narrative?
Right. Some critics argued, Republicans basically do the playbook that Democrats have been running for a while. The idea being Democrats complain when these tools are used against them. There was even a mention of a New York Times report that supposedly admitted that Democrats have little to fight back with on the gerrymandering front because they have gerrymandered their states so extensively.
And Illinois was brought up?
Illinois was cited as a great example of that, yeah. So it adds this layer of, both sides do it.
We also saw comments from Governor J.B. Pritzker. He weighed in, accusing Republicans of cheating. What was his take?
Yeah, Governor Pritzker reportedly called Donald Trump a cheater and a would-be dictator. His argument seemed to be, look, if Trump is telling Texas Republicans what to do to, quote, change the game because they fear losing in 2026,
then all bets are off.
Exactly, and all bets are off, and everything got to be on the table for Democrats. He urged them to fight back. So his perspective seems to justify actions that might seem undemocratic to some if you believe you're facing an opposition that's, quote, a special kind of dangerous.
Which, in his view, could lead to violating rights and norms.
Right. Potentially violating a bunch of Americans' rights and throwing out all the norms that you allegedly value.
Yes.
This very ends justify the means kind of argument.
Okay, so redistricting was the main flashpoint. But the sources also made clear this walkout had broader consequences, right? It stopped other things, too.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about the maps. The walkout temporarily halted other conservative priorities that were lined up for that special session.
Like, what else got put on hold?
Well, there were new abortion restrictions. Specifically, a bill allowing private citizens to sue health providers over mailing or prescribing abortion medication. That was stopped. And also a bathroom bill, the kind that would ban transgender people from using public restrooms matching their gender identity in public spaces.
And even things unrelated to those hot-button issues.
Yeah, interestingly, even legislation related to significant casualties from floods in Kerr County got derailed. Remember, these special sessions are short, limited to 30 days. So the walkout immediately raised the possibility they'd need a second special session just to deal with this stuff.
So, stepping back from the day-to-day drama of it all, what's the bigger picture takeaway here? What does this Texas standoff really tell us?
Well, beyond the immediate political maneuvering, who wins, who loses in this short term, what our sources suggest is that these kinds of standoffs, like the Texas quorum break, they really highlight a deepening trend nationally. It feels like we're shifting from maybe traditional policy debates to more like high-stakes strategic warfare.
Where even the rules themselves become weapons.
Exactly. Procedural tools get weaponized.
Yeah.
And the result, often legislative paralysis, gridlock, and maybe an erosion of those traditional political norms. So it's not just about winning seats anymore. It seems to be about fundamentally trying to reshape the rules of the game itself. It reflects this really profound disagreement over how electoral maps should be drawn and what that means long-term for political power and, voter representation.
Okay, that's a really potent insight. Now, let's shift gears completely. From that kind of strategic political battlefield, let's pivot to a different kind of public conversation that our sources brought up. This one touches more on personal ambition, family, society's expectations. We saw this headline from the Wall Street Journal, "The Conservative Women Who Having It All." What was the focus there?
Yeah, it's a fascinating shift. What's compelling is the piece focused on providing evidence or examples of conservative women who are excelling in really demanding careers while also having families.
And they name names.
They did. Figures like Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, former South Carolina governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and Senator Katie Britt from Alabama. They were all highlighted as examples of this dynamic.
And Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, she was quoted. Something about returning to work very quickly after childbirth.
That's right, yeah. On a recent podcast, apparently, she said she went back to work just 4 days after giving birth. And her quote was pretty forceful. She said, "I would reject you can't be a good mom and be at your job."
Wow. But she acknowledged it's tough.
Oh, definitely. She added, "It's not for everybody. It takes a lot of will and faith and prayer, and it's hard, but it can be done." So it's a statement of possibility, but not necessarily ease.
And this whole discussion, it also kind of poked at the idea of feminism, didn't it? Suggesting maybe it's not just a concept owned by the left.
Exactly. The framing was that this discussion flipped the idea that feminism only exists on the left, suggesting it's, quote, on the right in its own way, too. And Mary Catherine Ham, responding to this idea, she pointed to Nikki Haley.
What about Nikki Haley?
Well, Ham noted Haley was apparently planning her daughter's wedding while she was running for president. Ham called that the multitasking Olympics, which, yeah, paints quite a picture.
It really does. Ham also had this interesting nuance, though. She said, motherhood and career can be compatible, but not imperceptible. What does she mean by that? Not imperceptible.
Yeah, that's a great quote. She elaborated, basically saying, look, there are things you give up on one side or the other. It's not seamless. It doesn't look the same throughout your kids' lives. She spoke from her own experience, too, as a mother of 4.
What did she share?
She said, "I love doing my job, and I love being a parent to them. I have given up opportunities and money to make sure that I am there for them." She even mentioned her time as a single widowed mother to 2 kids, noting that came certainly with its own set of problems. So she's emphasizing real-world trade-offs, not some perfect, effortless balance.
Right. The compatibility doesn't mean there aren't sacrifices. And did she suggest what helps these conservative women, in her view, navigate these challenges?
She pointed towards faith. She said, relying on your faith, enjoying motherhood itself, enjoying your children, and letting that give you the tools to succeed in your career. She thinks that's something that women right women of faith are pretty good at.
Yeah.
But she also quickly acknowledged, it isn't going to work for everyone. She even said, I can't do the Caroline Leavitt, referring to that 4 days back to work example. I'm going to do a different model of that.
So it's about finding your own model, maybe. What's the sort of core insight, then, about how this having it all idea is being discussed or maybe reshaped by conservative women?
Well, what seems really insightful from the sources is how this having it all narrative, which, let's face it, has often been associated more with liberal feminism, is being perhaps redefined or at least embraced by these conservative women.
But through a specific lens, right? A lens of faith, putting family at the center, personal resilience.
So less about maybe leaning in the Sheryl Sandberg sense and more about what? Compatibility. Yeah, maybe compatibility is a good word. It suggests an evolution of how gender roles are viewed within conservative thinking. Not necessarily trying for a seamless integration of work and family, but finding ways for them to coexist, maybe sequentially, maybe with trade-offs. It offers maybe a different model for success in these high-profile careers, emphasizing finding what works for you and your family, at whatever stage of your life.
Okay, that makes sense. And, underlying both of these things we've discussed, the legislative fights in Texas, these evolving narratives for women in public life, our sources also pointed to this persistent, almost background hum of the culture war. It seems to touch almost everything, doesn't it?
It really does seem that way. You look at the fierce debate over abortion restrictions in Texas, that perfectly mirrors the bigger national arguments about judicial authority, especially the Supreme Court's view on things like nationwide injunctions, which conservatives often see as lower courts overreaching.
And immigration, too. That's always there.
Always a hot-button issue, right? Strong opinions on enforcement, sanctuary cities, legal status. It all gets pulled into this framework. Same with federal funding debates, think Planned Parenthood, or public broadcasting like NPR and PBS, even economic policies, inflation, federal spending.
And even older things still linger, like Russiagate.
Yeah, that came up too. The collusion hoax claims, the investigations, it all gets rehashed through this culture war lens. And now even new things like artificial intelligence, questions about its power, the ethics. Those are starting to be debated along these same cultural fault lines too.
So with this pervasive culture war climate as the backdrop, what does it mean for how the two sides actually talk, how they communicate about these disputes?
Well, the material we reviewed definitely highlights a pretty distinct communication style on both sides. You see Democrats often framing disputes as, a fight for democracy itself. They talk about fighting back against authoritarian moves. They accuse Republicans of cheating.
And on the Republican side?
Conversely, Republicans tend to characterize Democratic actions, like that quorum break in Texas, using words like tantrums, calling them undemocratic. They accuse Democrats of being unhinged, radical, maybe out of touch with mainstream values. So it often feels like it's less about disagreeing on policy details.
And more about a fundamental struggle.
Exactly, and a fundamental struggle over the direction, the very values of the nation. It reflects these really deeply held beliefs, different ways of understanding how knowledge works, how it should be applied. It really underscores why it's so important to try and think critically, consider all those different viewpoints.
Okay. As we start to wrap up this deep dive, we've definitely covered some ground. Navigated those intricate strategies and legislative standoffs, explored these evolving narratives around career, family, public life.
Yeah, and the material we unpacked today, it really shows, doesn't it, that beneath those headlines are always these layers of motivation, historical context, different viewpoints, all shaping our political and social world. And, knowledge is really most valuable when you can understand it, apply it. And hearing multiple perspectives, that truly enriches the understanding, I think.
Absolutely. So thinking back on everything we discussed, what stands out most to you, the listener? Was it the strategic gamesmanship in Texas? Or maybe the personal stories of women juggling, demanding careers and family? Whatever it was, we really hope you found some surprising facts, maybe some new ways of looking at things.
And maybe this raises an important question for you to think about going forward.
Yeah.
We live in this era of just constant information, right?
Yeah.
And often really polarized debates. So how can really understanding the stated motivations and the counterarguments from all sides, how can that help you better cut through the noise and discern the core issues beyond just those surface-level fights?
That's a great question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this exploration has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of these pretty complex issues. Until next time, keep digging, keep learning, and definitely keep asking those important questions.